Right now, somewhere in a sterile, brilliantly lit laboratory, biomedical engineers are doing something that sounds like pure science fiction.
It really does.
They're taking a protein spun by a blind flightless moth, and they're using it to build microscopic scaffolds. And these scaffolds are literally designed to help human organs regenerate.
Yeah, it's happening today.
Now, I want you to just think about that for a second. That exact same moth, or at least its ancestors, built the Byzantine Empire.
Right.
It acted as the first truly global cryptocurrency, and for thousands of years, producing the fabric it makes has required boiling insects alive just to weave a luxury scarf. So today, we're talking about silk.
And it is arguably the most paradoxical material on Earth. I mean, when we normally think about human engineering, or how we've built the modern world, we usually picture brute force.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Massive foundries pouring concrete, swinging steel.
Exactly. We
Huh?
force nature into submission, we carve it up. But silk represents a completely inverted paradigm. It is an empire built on absolute fragility.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We are looking at a set of analytical notes just titled silk.pdf, and we're unpacking how this delicate microscopic thread, spun in total silence by a tiny insect, somehow managed to conquer the globe.
It's a massive story.
It really is. And it's a journey custom tailored for you listening right now, especially if you love pulling back the curtain on hidden systems, because I'll be honest, this isn't just a history of fashion.
No, not at all.
This is about how human beings observe the natural world, extract its most closely guarded secrets, and then construct these sprawling, massive economic and cultural machines around it.
And those machines, they bring profound beauty to our world, but they also carry hidden, sometimes deeply uncomfortable costs. And to really understand how a fabric can do all of that, we have to start at the absolute foundation.
Right, the raw material itself.
Exactly.
The biology.
Let's start there, because before we did the research for this deep dive, I think I unconsciously lumped silk into the same category as like cotton or linen.
Most people do. Right, because it's a natural fiber, it comes from nature, so it's all kind of the same thing. But chemically, structurally, silk exists in a totally different universe than cotton.
Completely different universe.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at cotton or linen, those are plant-based fibers.
Okay.
They are made out of cellulose. It's essentially plant matter. But silk is a protein fiber.
Wait, a protein fiber, so like hair or fingernails.
Exactly, like hair or fingernails or wool.
Uh,
It is an animal-based protein. It is actively produced by a living organism as a functional part of its life cycle.
that is wild.
And specifically, the vast majority of commercial silk comes from the cocoon of the domesticated mulberry silkworm. The scientific name is Bombyx mori. And the biology of what this creature is doing is just staggering.
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Well, think about a cotton plant. It just passively grows little tufts of cellulose, right? But this worm is essentially a microscopic, highly complex biochemical manufacturing plant.
Okay, let's break down that manufacturing plant, because
Okay.
the caterpillar starts out tiny, right, and then it just goes on an absolute bender of eating.
Oh, a total feeding frenzy. It eats mulberry leaves, and only mulberry leaves, almost continuously for about a month.
Just nonstop chomping.
Nonstop. And what's happening inside the worm during that month is a marvel of biological conversion. It is taking the plant matter,
The cellulose of the mulberry leaves, right?
exactly, the cellulose, and its digestive system is breaking that down and converting it into liquid animal protein.
Liquid protein.
Yes, and it stores this liquid protein in two massive salivary glands that run the entire length of its body.
So it's basically just walking around full of liquid silk.
Pretty much.
But how does it get from liquid protein inside a worm to a thread that I can actually, weave into a shirt?
Through an organ near its mouth called the spinneret. When it's time to build its cocoon and pupate, the worm forces this liquid protein out through the spinneret.
Like pushing toothpaste out of a tube.
Kind of, but with a crucial difference. The mechanical friction of being pulled through that tiny opening, combined with exposure to the air, causes the liquid protein molecules to align and solidify instantly.
Wait, instantly.
Instantly. It turns into a continuous, solid filament.
And it's not just one uniform string, is it? Because the source notes mention it's actually a composite material. There are two distinct proteins involved, fibroin and sericin. Walk me through what those two are actually doing.
Sure. Think of it like building a fiberglass boat.
Okay.
For a fiberglass boat, you need the strong glass fibers,
Right.
and then you need the resin to hold it all together, right?
Right.
The fibroin is the structural core. That's the backbone of the thread. It is incredibly strong, incredibly tough. But the worm doesn't just want a dry string.
Because it's trying to build a house, essentially.
Exactly. It wants to build a protective, waterproof armor around itself so it can metamorphose safely. So as the fibroin is extruded, it's simultaneously coated in a second protein called sericin.
Which is basically a glue.
Exactly. It's a gummy, sticky, water-soluble protein. As the worm spins, it tosses its head back and forth in this figure-8 pattern.
I've seen videos of that. It's hypnotic.
It is. And as it does that, the sericin glues all the layers of fibroin together, and it hardens into the solid shell of the cocoon.
But if it's glued together, how do we get soft fabric out of it?
Well, when humans eventually process this to make luxurious soft fabric, that sericin glue has to be meticulously removed through a process called degumming.
Right. And the scale of this single process just blew my mind when I was reading the source, because the worm is extruding its own custom-built protein-based rebar and superglue simultaneously.
Right.
And one single continuous thread from one cocoon can stretch for hundreds of meters. We're talking over a kilometer in some cases.
Unbelievable.
It really is. That's longer than a football field. Actually, it's longer than several football fields, generated by one insect with no loom, no tools, just a worm in a tree spinning a continuous filament.
And the fact that it's a continuous filament is the holy grail here.
Yeah.
That's what makes silk so special.
Why is that?
Think about cotton again. Cotton grows in short little tufts.
Right, the little fluffy balls.
Yeah. To make a cotton thread, human beings have to harvest those short, tiny fibers, what we call the staple, line them all up, and twist them together tightly to create a yarn.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It requires immense mechanical labor. But silk emerges into the world already as a continuous, usable thread.
Wow. And that biological structure is what gives it that iconic look, right? Because when you see real silk, you know it immediately.
Absolutely.
It has this unmistakable shimmer. It doesn't look like a shiny plastic raincoat. It looks, I don't know, deep. What is actually happening with the physics of light when it hits silk?
This is where we cross from biology into optics. Silk's beauty is structural color.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means the color and shine don't come from a chemical coating. If you put a single silk filament under an electron microscope and look at its cross-section, it is not perfectly round.
Like a synthetic thread would be.
Right, a synthetic polyester thread is perfectly round, but a silk filament is actually shaped like a slightly rounded triangle.
Oh, so it's literally a tiny prism.
Precisely. It's a microscopic prism. And because of that triangular shape, when light hits a silk thread, it doesn't just bounce flatly off the surface like a mirror.
Okay.
It penetrates the fiber, refracts, bounces around inside those triangular walls, and then scatters back out at different angles.
So it's glowing from the inside.
Yes. This scattering produces that dynamic, shifting shimmer. That's why silk looks alive when you move it. A synthetic round fiber just reflects light directly back, so it looks flat and glossy. Silk looks like it has depth.
So we have structural color, and then we have the internal molecular structure of the fibroin itself, which, according to the notes, consists of these heavily packed beta-pleated sheets interspersed with amorphous regions.
Yes, that's the biochemistry of it.
Which sounds highly technical, but fundamentally it gives silk this insane duality. It has massive tensile strength, meaning it resists being pulled apart, paired with incredible flexibility and drape.
It's incredibly versatile.
Right. I mean, it can be woven into something as airy and floating as chiffon or as dense and rigid as Duchess satin.
It is arguably the most versatile natural fiber in existence. But here is where we hit the absolute core paradox of the material.
Right. Because on paper, silk is the elite high-performance athlete of the fabric world. Its tensile strength is wild. In certain contexts, by weight, it is stronger than steel.
Yes, stronger than steel.
That is why, historically, before synthetics like nylon were invented, if you needed a parachute that absolutely would not tear or surgical sutures to stitch a human body back together, you used silk. It just stops tearing.
It does.
But then, wait, hold on. I need you to explain this to me because it's driving me crazy. How can a protein be stronger than steel by weight, but if I sweat in it and wash it with Tide, it completely melts and ruins the garment?
That's a great question.
Like, that chemically doesn't make sense to me. What is happening there?
It's fascinating, really, and it all comes back to the fact that it is an animal protein. Proteins are made of amino acids linked together by peptide bonds.
Okay, I'm with you.
When you talk about tensile strength pulling the fiber end to end, those molecular chains are incredibly resilient. They hold tight, but they are chemically very sensitive to their environment.
So it's physically strong but chemically weak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's look at standard laundry detergent, like you mentioned. Standard detergents are usually alkaline. They have a high pH.
Right, to get rid of dirt.
Yes. They're designed specifically to break down organic matter,
Yeah.
food stains, oils, dirt. But because silk is organic matter, an alkaline environment literally begins to sever those peptide bonds.
Oh, no.
The detergent can't tell the difference between a gravy stain and the silk itself. It begins dissolving the fabric.
Wow. So if you're listening to this and wondering why that incredibly expensive silk pillowcase you bought feels crunchy and ruined after 3 months of washing it with regular laundry pods, this is why. You are chemically dissolving your pillowcase.
Exactly. You're destroying the peptide bonds. And sweat is similar. Perspiration contains salts and acids that degrade the protein over time.
So you can't wash it normally, and you can't sweat in it.
And you can't leave it in the sun either. It's highly vulnerable to ultraviolet light. If you leave a silk curtain hanging in a sunny window, the UV radiation breaks down the molecular bonds, the color fades, and the fabric literally shatters like old paper.
Shatters!
Yes, it just crumbles. And it also loses up to half its strength when it gets wet, making it highly prone to tearing in the wash.
It's the ultimate glass cannon. It has the strength to stop a microscopic bullet, but if you look at it wrong or expose it to standard modern life, it disintegrates.
And that exact fragility, that incredibly narrow window of survival, is what makes the human discovery and mass harvesting of silk such an incredible leap of observation.
Right, because you have to be so careful with it.
You cannot force silk. You can't beat it with mallets to separate the fibers like you do with flax to make linen.
Yeah.
You have to deeply attune yourself to its biological reality. You have to work on its terms.
Which perfectly transitions us to the origins. Because you don't just, stumble upon an industrial process this delicate and complex. The history takes us back to ancient China, roughly 3000 to 2000 BCE.
A very long time ago.
And if you read any textbook on this, there is a very famous, very cinematic legend about how it started.
Yes, the legend of Li Zhu.
Yeah.
She was the primary consort of the mythical Yellow Emperor.
Right.
And the story goes that she was sitting in the imperial gardens under a mulberry tree, drinking a hot cup of tea.
As one does.
Right. And a silkworm cocoon drops from the branches right into her hot tea. As she tries to fish the cocoon out, the heat of the water softens that gummy saracen we talked about.
The glue.
Exactly. And as she pulls, the cocoon begins to unravel into this single, endless, impossibly beautiful shimmering thread.
It's such a great story. It's perfectly packaged for a movie. But the reality is that silk wasn't just invented in a single aha moment over tea, right?
It's not at all.
It was a staggering multi-generational learning curve. Because to actually create a functional silk industry, what we call sericulture, you need an incredibly specific, deeply fragile ecosystem.
Sericulture is not farming. It is the bioengineering of an entire supply chain.
Walk me through that supply chain.
First, you have the moth itself, Bombyx mori. Through thousands of years of human selection, this creature has been so profoundly domesticated that it no longer exists in the wild. It is entirely dependent on humans for survival.
I read in the notes that it's completely blind and it can't even fly anymore.
That's right.
The adult moth just emerges, mates, lays eggs, and dies.
It has been genetically optimized purely for silk production. Then, on top of the moth, you need the Morus alba, the white mulberry tree. The leaves have to be fresh, clean, and perfectly timed with the hatching of the worms.
So timing is everything.
And climate. You need a stable, temperate, or subtropical climate with strictly controlled humidity. If the temperature fluctuates too much, the worms die. If there's disease, the whole crop dies.
So you have this high-stakes biological clock ticking. The worms eat, they spin their cocoons, and then comes the traditional harvesting process, which is both hyper-precise and, frankly, pretty brutal.
Yes, it is.
Let's walk through what the artisan actually has to do once those cocoons are spun, because the first major step is stifling.
Stifling is the critical intervention. Because remember, inside that cocoon is a living pupa metamorphosing into a moth.
Right.
If you leave it alone, the moth will mature. It will secrete a brown fluid containing an enzyme called coucounase, which dissolves a hole in the cocoon, and it will push its way out.
But if it does that, it cuts the thread.
Exactly. It breaks that continuous kilometer-long filament into thousands of useless short pieces. So to preserve the unbroken thread, the cocoon must be stifled.
Meaning?
This means subjecting the cocoons to hot air, steam, or boiling water. This kills the pupa inside before it can emerge, while simultaneously softening that saracen glue.
Man, so once it's softened, they have to find the microscopic end of the thread on the outside of the cocoon. And then comes the real art of this whole process.
Reeling.
Reeling is incredible.
I need you to explain reeling because the level of tactile skill here just seems superhuman to me.
It really is. Reeling is the process of unwinding the cocoons to create a usable yarn. But a single filament from one cocoon is far too delicate to weave. It's essentially microscopic. You'd never be able to handle it.
Right. So the artisan, traditionally a highly skilled woman, takes the filaments from 5, 6, maybe 8 cocoons, sitting in a basin of hot water and twists them together into a single thread.
And she's pulling this thread onto a spinning reel, but she's dealing with living organic variation, right? Not every cocoon is exactly the same thickness.
Exactly. And that's where the skill comes in.
Like,
As she reels the thread, she is literally feeling the tension and thickness with her fingers. As one cocoon runs out or the filament gets thinner, she has to seamlessly attach a new filament from a new cocoon into the running thread without stopping.
just by touch.
Mostly by touch and sight, yes. And she has to ensure the final yarn remains perfectly uniform in diameter. If the water is too hot, the silk turns to mush. If it's too cold, the glue won't release and the thread snaps.
It's like Goldilocks.
Yes. If she pulls with too much tension, it breaks. Too little tension, and the yarn tangles.
This is what I find so fascinating about this source material. This isn't knowledge you get from reading a manual. This is profoundly embodied knowledge. You feel it in your bones and the calluses on your fingers over years and years of apprenticeship. The artisan knows by the micro vibrations on the thread if a cocoon in the basin is failing.
It requires rhythm, patience, and a total integration of human skill and natural process.
It is the pinnacle of physical attunement, and the result of that agonizingly slow, deeply attuned process is a fabric that is so impossibly luxurious, so visually stunning, that it inevitably transcends clothing.
It becomes much more than clothing.
Right. Because once a society perfects a process this difficult and creates something this valuable, it does not stay a local village secret.
Definitely not.
It scales. And as it scaled in ancient China, it literally changed the map of the world. It became an instrument of absolute geopolitical power.
Yes, in the Han Dynasty, so we were talking roughly 200 BCE to 200 CE, silk was completely state-controlled. It was heavily regulated by the imperial court.
So it wasn't just like rich people buying nice shirts.
No, it wasn't just a commodity.
Yep.
It was essentially diplomatic currency. They used it to buy off nomadic tribes, to secure borders, to pay imperial officials.
And it was a closely guarded technological monopoly. What blows my mind is how China weaponized this. They were perfectly happy to export the fabric to the rest of the world and take their gold, but the method of making it, the sericulture, the worms, the reeling techniques, was a state secret punishable by death.
It was essentially classified intellectual property on par with nuclear technology today.
Wow.
And because the demand for this fabric in the West, in Rome and Persia, was so insatiable, it fueled the creation of the Silk Road. But we really need to reframe how we think about the Silk Road.
How so?
We often imagine it as a road that was built and then people decided to carry silk on it. It's actually the other way around. Silk wasn't just the cargo. Silk was the economic infrastructure that made the route possible.
Wait, explain that. How does a luxury fabric act as infrastructure?
It comes down to the brutal realities of ancient logistics. If you want to trade goods across thousands of miles of the Eurasian steppe deserts, massive mountain ranges, territories controlled by bandits, you face a massive transportation cost.
Sure.
You can't load up a camel with tons of cheap weed or heavy iron ore and march it from Chang'an to Rome. The cost of feeding the camel and the merchants would exceed the value of the goods by the time you traveled 100 miles.
So you need something that is incredibly valuable but weighs almost nothing.
Exactly. You need a commodity with a phenomenally high value-to-weight ratio. Silk is virtually weightless. It's compact, it doesn't spoil, it doesn't rot like spices can, and emperors halfway across the world will literally empty their treasuries for it.
So you just strap a few rolls onto a camel and you're rich.
A merchant could carry a king's ransom on the back of a single pack animal. Because silk made these perilous journeys massively profitable, the caravan routes became permanently established.
So the silk pays for the road to exist.
Yes. And once the road exists and the caravans are flowing, other things can hitch a ride. Spices, precious metals, glass, but more importantly, intangible things.
Like ideas.
Exactly. Mathematics, astronomy, papermaking technology. Buddhism travels from India to China along these routes. Islam spreads along these routes. Without the sheer economic gravity of silk making those journeys profitable, that level of early global connection might never have happened.
This is where I had a massive aha moment researching this. If you look at its properties, silk was basically the cryptocurrency of the ancient world.
That's a very provocative analogy. Unpack that a
Well,
bit.
think about it. What makes a currency functional? It has to be portable. And silk is incredibly light. It has to be divisible.
Sure.
You could literally take a roll of silk, cut 3 yards off of it, and use it to buy a horse. It was universally desired across wildly different cultures who didn't even speak the same language. And we know it was used to officially pay soldiers and collect taxes.
Yes, the state used it directly as money.
That is a functional, decentralized currency. And just like crypto, its underlying code, the biological process of sericulture, was fiercely guarded by a select few. The people who held the code held the power.
The analogy holds up incredibly well, because when you have a code that valuable, generating that much wealth, people are going to try to hack it.
Oh, absolutely.
And that leads to one of the greatest stories of ancient industrial espionage.
Yes, you have to tell the story of the Byzantine monks, because when I read this in the source material, I was laughing out loud.
It is legendary. So, by the 6th century CE, the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, is facing a massive economic crisis. Their elite class is absolutely addicted to silk, and they are hemorrhaging massive amounts of gold eastward to the Persians and the Chinese to buy it.
They're bankrupting themselves for fashion.
Pretty much. Emperor Justinian realizes this trade deficit is completely unsustainable. So according to the historical accounts, he recruits 2 monks. These monks had traveled eastward, possibly to Central Asia or China, and they had secretly observed the classified code. They learned how sericulture actually worked.
They realized it wasn't a plant, it was a worm.
Exactly, they saw the worms. So Justinian sends them back with a mission. They travel east, and they manage to secure silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds. But here's the problem. How do you smuggle the most heavily guarded biological secret in the world past border checkpoints?
Because if you get caught, that's it. Death penalty.
Exactly. So they hollowed out their bamboo walking canes, hid the microscopic eggs inside the canes, and walked them all the way back to Constantinople.
It's unbelievable. They essentially sneaked a biological thumb drive out of a secure server room right under the guards' noses.
And with those eggs from the bamboo canes, Byzantium broke the Chinese monopoly. They established their own imperial silk workshops. This completely shifted the economic and political balance of power in the Mediterranean world.
Just because of 2 hollow sticks.
Because the locus of power was no longer just in trading the material, it was in controlling the knowledge of its creation.
And as the knowledge of silk spread and it moved across all these different borders, it did something fascinating. It didn't just carry monetary value. As different societies adopted it, they assigned their own deep, specific cultural meanings to it.
Yes, it adapted to the culture.
Right. It became what we can call the uniform of meaning, because silk was never an everyday fabric for the masses. Because of its cost, it was reserved for threshold moments, weddings, funerals, royal courts. But different cultures developed totally different dialects for how silk should be used.
Exactly. Let's look at ancient China, its birthplace. There, silk wasn't just about showing off wealth. It symbolized cosmic harmony and order.
So it was spiritual.
It was bureaucratic and spiritual. The emperor's silk robes were embroidered with the sun, the moon, dragons, mountains. Wearing silk meant you were physically wrapping yourself in the moral structure of the universe and the state. It was a tool of order.
But then you travel forward in time to Renaissance Europe. You look at cities like Florence or Venice. Silk, there wasn't about cosmic harmony. It was about raw, aggressive power and exclusivity.
It was very competitive.
Extremely. In fact, they had sumptuary laws. Can you explain what a sumptuary law is for anyone who might not know?
A sumptuary law is legislation specifically designed to regulate consumption and display.
Meaning what you can buy and wear.
Exactly. In this context, governments literally passed laws dictating what fabrics you were legally allowed to wear based on your social class. If you were a merchant who got rich, but you weren't born into the nobility, it was physically illegal for you to wear certain types of silk, velvet, or brocade.
So the state is using the fabric as a physical fence to keep the classes separated. If I see you wearing heavy silk brocade, I instantly know your legal and social standing.
Yes, it signaled aristocratic dominance. But then you travel to Japan, and the dialect changes entirely. In traditional Japanese kimono culture, loud, flashy displays of wealth were often considered vulgar. Silk was about extreme subtlety, seasonal discipline, and restraint.
Like hiding the wealth.
In a way, yes. The mastery was in the dye techniques, the hidden lining of the garment, the precise knot of the obi. It was an internalized, quiet refinement.
And then in India, it takes on this profoundly sacred dimension. A pure silk sari isn't just clothing, it is ritually pure. It's used in temple offerings, in Hindu weddings. It's an heirloom. You pass it down from mother to daughter, so it literally carries generational memory.
What is so compelling to me from an analytical standpoint is why silk adapts so flawlessly to all these different human meanings.
Why do you think it does?
It all traces back to the physical properties we discussed earlier, the material-aesthetic connection.
Okay, unpack that.
Cultures map their values onto the physical reality of the fiber. Its drape creates emotional movement. A flowing silk garment implies grace and fluidity. Its luster, that structural refraction of light we talked about, acts as a social signal.
Right, it catches your eye.
It literally catches the eye, drawing attention and conferring status. And its softness against the skin provides an intimate sensory function. The physical reality of the fiber dictates the emotional response of the human wearing it.
And that material aesthetic link continues right through into the 20th century. When you look at modern fashion history, designers are essentially playing with these physical properties to make massive cultural statements.
They absolutely are.
Like Coco Chanel in the 1920s. She takes silk, which had been fussy and complicated, and uses it to democratize elegance. She makes it sleek, modern, wearable.
Or consider Madeleine Vianney. She
Yeah.
pioneered the bias cut.
Okay, let's pause there because bias cut is a term people hear all the time in fashion, but what does it actually mean functionally? Like physically, what is happening to the fabric?
Well, woven fabric is made of threads going up and down the warp and threads going left to right the weft.
Basically a grid.
Exactly, a rigid grid. If you cut a piece of fabric straight up and down, parallel to those threads, it's quite rigid.
Yeah.
But if you turn the fabric 45 degrees diagonally across the weave and cut it that way on the bias, the fabric suddenly has stretch.
Oh, because you're pulling across the grid.
Yes, it becomes incredibly fluid. Vianney took heavy, luxurious silks, cut them on the bias, and let them drape naturally over the female body. She used the physical properties of silk to liberate women from the rigid, bone-crushing structure of corsetry.
She let the fabric flow instead of forcing the body into a shape.
Exactly.
And later you have Yves Saint Laurent using silk for gender-fluid silhouettes, taking sheer silk blouses and putting them in women's tuxedo suits, completely blending masculine and feminine aesthetics.
And a very powerful tool for designers.
And we still do this today. If you see Bruno Mars on stage wearing a retro silk shirt, he is projecting this effortless, nostalgic, incredibly smooth confidence. Or think about the 1990s, the silk slip dress.
The slip dress is a fascinating cultural moment.
It really is, because a slip was traditionally underwear. It was a private, intimate garment designed to sit against the skin to protect your outer clothes. And in the 90s, women started wearing silk slips out in public, to red carpets, to grunge shows, paired with beat-up Doc Martens.
It was a massive statement.
It completely blurred the boundaries between public and private, luxury and grunge. It feels like silk is the ultimate amplifier.
That's a good word for it.
If you want to project rigid, unyielding power, you wear stiff, heavy silk brocade. If you want to project vulnerability, rebellion, or fluidity, you wear a thin silk slip dress. The fabric doesn't impose one meaning, it amplifies whatever intention you pour into it.
An amplifier. That is a brilliant way to frame it. But here is the historical catch. Because it is such a powerful amplifier of status and meaning, the demand for it has always been totally insatiable.
People always want more of it.
And this brings us to a massive, violent collision course. Because the agonizingly slow, careful, embodied process of a village artisan reeling a few cocoons by hand was fundamentally incompatible with the brutal, output-driven speed of the Industrial Revolution.
Right, the machine meets the moth. Entering the 19th and 20th centuries, this deeply decentralized, family-based craft gets violently upended.
Everything changes.
We see the rise of centralized factories, massive mechanized reeling machines that replace human fingers, and the invention of synthetic chemical dyes that replace natural plant dyes.
Right.
But amid all this industrialization, there is one specific invention that I had no idea was connected to silk, and it completely blew my mind.
You're talking about the jacquard loom.
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
explain the jacquard loom, because this isn't just about textiles. This is about the origin of the modern world.
It truly is. To understand the genius of the jacquard loom, you have to understand how weaving complex patterns worked before it.
Okay, set the scene.
If you wanted to weave a piece of complex silk brocade, say a fabric with intricate floral patterns, you couldn't just throw a shuttle back and forth. For every single pass of the horizontal thread, a weaver and an assistant called a draw boy had to manually lift very specific, individual vertical threads in a highly complex sequence.
They literally had to memorize which threads to pull up for thousands of passes just to make a flower appear in the cloth.
Exactly. It was mind-numbingly slow, highly prone to human error, and required immense physical labor. The drawboys were often children, lifting heavy weights all day. Enter Joseph Marie Jacquard in 1804.
What did he do?
He invents a mechanism that fits on top of the loom. He realizes you can store the memory of the pattern outside of the human brain. He created a series of stiff pasteboard cards punched with holes.
Like the old Scantron tests or early computer punch cards.
Exactly like early computer punch cards. Each card represented one row of the weave.
Yeah.
The loom had a series of spring-loaded pins. As a card was pressed against the pins, if there was a hole in the card, the pin passed through, which engaged a hook that physically lifted that specific silk thread.
And if there was no hole?
If there was no hole, the pin was pushed back and the thread stayed down.
Hole or no hole, up or down, 1 or 0.
It was binary code made physical. By lacing hundreds or thousands of these punch cards together into a continuous loop, the machine automatically read the pattern. The weaver just had to pump a pedal and throw the shuttle. You could change the entire complex pattern just by swapping out the stack of cards.
So the mechanical memory of the pattern was stored in the physical cards. And the
Yeah.
craziest part of this, the part that just astounded me, is that decades later, when Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace were conceptualizing the analytical engine, the very first mechanical computer,
Yeah.
they directly referenced the Jacquard loom.
Yes, Ada Lovelace famously wrote about it.
She wrote that the analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves.
The information age, the digital world we live in today, was fundamentally born from the desire to produce luxury patterned silk faster and cheaper.
It is staggering. But here is the grim irony. While human beings invented these incredible machines to weave the silk faster, and eventually computers to design it, the raw material didn't change.
No, it
You
didn't.
still can't 3D print actual silk. You still need the blaned moth. You still need the mulberry leaves. You still need to boil the cocoons. And this creates a massive stratification in the modern global market.
Yes, the data paints a very stark picture of where silk sits today. If you look at reports from Textile Exchange, total global fiber production, everything from your t-shirts to car upholstery, reached about 124 million metric tons recently.
124 million tons.
And the vast, overwhelming majority of that is synthetic polyester and chemically intensive cotton.
And where does silk sit in that 124 million tons?
It is a microscopic fraction. It accounts for less than 0.2% of the global fiber market. For context, India, which is the second largest producer in the world behind China, reported producing just over 41,000 metric tons recently.
41,000 tons compared to 124 million tons. It's essentially a rounding error in volume. But in terms of value and cultural presence, it feels huge.
Because fast fashion constantly tries to artificially replicate it. You walk into any fast fashion mall store and you see racks of cheap polyester satin. Polysatin is designed to mimic the drape and the luster of silk without the staggering cost, the agricultural land use, or the delicate care requirements.
But it doesn't breathe like silk, and it sheds microplastics. But that massive wave of cheap imitation puts incredible downward pressure on the actual people producing real silk, which brings me to a question I really want to push you on.
Sure, go ahead.
With all this mechanization, did industrialization basically turn the masterful artisan into a mere machine operator? When I look at how silk is made today, the romance of the ancient craft seems to hide a lot of highly repetitive, poorly paid labor.
It is a profound tension, and it's something we have to confront. The transition from an artisan who commands the entire process, from raising the worm to dyeing the thread to weaving the cloth into a fragmented factory system, is jarring.
It strips away the agency.
Exactly. In many modern production centers, the labor is heavily stratified. It is often women and marginalized groups standing over vats of scalding water and chemicals, breathing in fumes, reeling threads all day for very low wages. They are disconnected from the final luxury product. The person reeling the silk will likely never be able to afford the scarf they are making.
So the profit is centralized into massive fashion houses, but the labor is decentralized and often exploited.
Yes. But, as with everything involving silk, there is a duality. Organizations like the International Sericultural Commission point out the other side of the coin. Sericulture is a massive engine for rural employment. In countries like India, Vietnam, and Thailand, millions of smallholder farmers and traditional weaving families rely entirely on silk for their livelihood. It provides income in areas where other agriculture might fail. If you suddenly shuttered the global silk industry because you found it ethically imperfect, you would instantaneously plunge millions of vulnerable families into absolute poverty.
So we are trapped between two realities. It exploits rural labor, but it also crucially sustains rural labor. It's not a simple binary. And this tension brings us right up to the present moment, because we cannot talk about producing a luxury fabric in the 2020s without colliding head-on with the modern reckoning around ethics, animal cruelty, and environmental sustainability.
It is the most fraught conversation in the textile world today.
And the most uncomfortable truth, the elephant in the room that we have to say plainly, is the animal ethics. Because as we discussed, to get conventional, high-gloss luxury silk, you have to boil or steam the pupa alive inside its cocoon. Billions of them every year.
To a growing segment of modern consumers, that is a hard stop. The idea of mass boiling a living organism simply to make a shiny tie or a luxury pillowcase is morally unjustifiable.
So the market, sensing this hesitation, responded with something called peace silk, or you'll see it marketed as ahimsa silk or Erie silk, ahimsa being the Sanskrit principle of nonviolence.
Right.
And the marketing pitch is brilliant. They say, we wait. They let the moth fully mature, naturally secrete its enzyme, break open the cocoon, and fly away or waddle away since they can't really fly. And only then do they harvest the empty cocoon. Cruelty-free luxury, problem solved.
Well, this is where the biological reality pushes back against consumer desires.
Right. I want to challenge this peace silk narrative because it's not a magic bullet. If you let the moth dissolve a hole in a cocoon, it cuts the thread. You no longer have a continuous kilometer-long filament. You have thousands of broken short fibers.
Yes, you're left with staple fibers, just like cotton or wool. And to turn that into yarn, you have to mechanically spin it. You have to twist those short fibers together. This fundamentally alters the physical nature of the fabric.
So it doesn't look the same.
No, pea silk does not have the intense, smooth, reflective luster of conventional reeled silk. It feels warmer, woollier, a bit more textured.
Which is fine if you want a woolly scarf, but if you want that liquid, icy slip dress, pea silk can't do it.
Furthermore, the yield drops precipitously.
Oh.
Because you're waiting longer and the spinning process is more complex, pea silk is significantly more expensive to produce and uses more resources per usable pound of fiber. And there are massive questions about transparency.
Like tracking it?
Yes. On a large commercial scale, monitoring exactly how millions of moths are treated after they emerge is incredibly difficult.
So I have to ask, is peace silk actually a scalable, ethical solution, or is it mostly just a psychological loophole for modern consumers? A way for us to buy a luxury product without feeling guilty. Because if you are using massive amounts of agricultural land and water to produce a much lower yield of fabric, aren't you just trading localized animal harm for broader ecological harm?
You have hit the exact center of the sustainability debate, because assessing the environmental impact of silk is incredibly difficult. A lot of consumers assume, hey, it comes from a tree and a worm. It's natural, therefore it must be perfectly sustainable. But the data scientists looking at global supply chains heavily push back on that.
The apparel industry uses these massive data assessment tools like the Higg Material Sustainability Index, and they evaluate fabrics cradle to gate, which basically means they measure all the environmental impacts from the moment you plant the tree up to the moment the finished fabric leaves the factory gate. And in those metrics, silk gets absolutely hammered.
It scores very poorly in cradle-to-gate metrics.
Why is that?
Because cultivating mulberry trees requires significant arable land and massive amounts of fresh water for irrigation. The silkworms themselves require highly climate-controlled environments, which uses electricity. And then, boiling millions of cocoons in heating vats of water for degumming and dyeing requires a massive amount of thermal energy, often generated by burning coal or gas in developing nations. Per kilogram of finished fiber, the carbon and water footprint of silk can be astronomically high compared to something like synthetic polyester.
But wait, this is where I have a major issue with that metric. Cradle to gate stops at the factory door. It completely ignores the use phase. It ignores what happens when the garment is actually in a human being's closet.
Exactly. And that is the fatal flaw in reducing sustainability to a single algorithm.
Because think about it. A fast fashion polyester dress might require less water and energy to manufacture initially, but you buy it for $20, you wear it to one party, it falls apart in the wash, and you throw it in the garbage.
And then what happens to it?
It goes to a landfill where it sits for 400 years, shedding microplastics into the groundwater and the ocean. Contrast that with a heavy silk scarf. Yes, it took more water and energy to create, but silk demands care. You don't casually throw it in the washing machine. You hand wash it, you mend it, you cherish it. You might wear that scarf for 30 years and pass it down to your daughter.
It becomes an heirloom.
Exactly. And when it finally does wear out, it is a protein. You can bury it in the garden and it will biodegrade safely back into the earth.
The author of our source material frames this beautifully. Silk's high maintenance is actually its greatest environmental asset. It forces deceleration. It is inherently anti-fast fashion. It demands a relationship of care from the user. The most sustainable silk garment in the world is the one that already exists, a vintage piece, an heirloom.
So we've traveled from ancient Chinese emperors using it as currency to the birth of computers with the jacquard loom to modern debates about animal cruelty and microplastics. But the absolute wildest part of this deep dive is where silk is heading next. Because the future of this ancient thread might not be in our closets at all. It might be inside our bodies.
We are seeing a massive resurgence of silk in the fields of biotechnology and advanced medicine.
Which feels like science fiction, but it's happening right now. Scientists are isolating silk fibroin, that incredibly strong structural core of the protein we talked about in the biology section, and using it to perform medical miracles. We're talking about using silk to build tissue scaffolds that help human bodies regenerate damaged skin or bone. We're talking about biodegradable optical implants and drug delivery systems where they encapsulate medicine in a microscopic silk shell that slowly dissolves in the bloodstream.
Yeah, the reason silk is so perfect for this goes back to its biological origin. Because it is a natural protein, it is highly biocompatible.
Meaning our bodies accept it.
Yes. The human immune system generally does not recognize it as a foreign threat, so it doesn't reject it. And biomedical engineers can precisely tune the molecular structure of the fibroin so that it dissolves in the body over an exact period of time, days, weeks, or months, once its job is done.
It's just a beautiful, poetic reversal. The fiber that started thousands of years ago as the ultimate symbol of imperial wealth and cosmic harmony is returning to its raw biological roots. It's becoming a scaffolding for healing human tissue, nerves, and organs. The emperor's robe literally becomes the patient's cure.
It is a stunning trajectory. And I think all of this, the history, the tension between violence and beauty, the requirement for profound care, leads us perfectly to the final and perhaps most philosophical lens provided in our source material.
Yes, the Bannock lens. I found this conceptual framework fascinating. The source text uses this archetype, this subpersonality called Bannock, to analyze the philosophy of silk. Can you explain what this Bannock persona represents?
The Bannock lens is essentially a framework for understanding a specific style of existence or leadership. It represents operating through quiet consistency, extreme patience, and deep emotional and environmental attunement. It's the opposite of loud, top-down, aggressive dominance. It's about harmonizing complex, fragile systems from the inside out, often invisibly.
And when you apply that lens to silk, the entire history we just discussed snaps into focus. Because silk, at every stage of its existence, physically punishes force. If you try to rush the silkworm's feeding cycle, it dies. If the artisan pulls the thread too hard or too fast during reeling, it snaps. If you throw the fabric into a harsh, aggressive washing machine, it chemically melts. It demands attunement from humans.
The core philosophical tension of silk, viewed through this lens, is the relationship between beauty and exploitation. The smoother, the more flawless, the more effortless something appears on the surface, the more intense, agonizing, and often hidden labor was required to produce it.
The Bannock lens forces us to look at the invisible crew holding the ship together. When you see a beautiful silk gown on a runway, you just see the finished, effortless glide of the fabric. But what you don't see is the thousands of blind insects, the weeks of feeding, the stifling of the cocoons, the women standing over scalding basins, carefully combining microscopic filaments, the dyers, the weavers memorizing patterns. A massive, quiet system of coordination. And if that system isn't cared for, if the workers are underpaid, if the water is polluted, if the material is rushed, the whole thing collapses.
Exactly. It asks us to recognize the maintenance that makes beauty possible.
Which makes me want to pose a question directly to you, the listener. Think about your own life. Think about your family dynamics or your role at your company. Are you the silk in your organization? Are you the person operating quietly in the background, absorbing tension, holding complex, fragile human systems together, ensuring everything looks smooth on the outside? But secretly, you are incredibly vulnerable to burnout if you aren't cared for and respected by the people who rely on you.
That is a deeply resonant question, because our modern economic systems almost exclusively reward loud, visible output. They reward the disruptors. They often completely ignore the quiet, consistent, empathetic maintenance that keeps the system from shattering. Silk teaches us that true refinement, true structural strength, has a steep cost. And very often, the people enjoying the refinement are entirely disconnected from the people paying the cost.
I think that is the perfect synthesis of this entire journey. Silk is the ultimate mirror for human ambition. It is what happens when nature offers us something profoundly delicate and humans decide to build massive, sprawling, globe-spanning systems of meaning, value, power, and industry around it. It is entirely natural, but its existence is strictly artificially controlled. It looks and feels as delicate as a spider web, but structurally it can stop a bullet. It is breathtakingly beautiful, but when you look at the labor and the biology, it is morally incredibly uncomfortable.
We didn't just use a moth survival mechanism. We relentlessly translated it into our own language. We turned it into the Silk Road, into sanctuary laws, into the jacquard loom, into haute couture, and now into dissolving biomedical sensors.
It is staggering to step back and look at the whole picture. From a cocoon accidentally falling into a mythical cup of hot tea, to the birth of global trade, to the foundational logic of the computer age, to the ethical dilemmas of the modern closet. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I know I will never look at a piece of fabric the same way again. Every single thread carries thousands of years of human and biological history.
It's a vital reminder that no object in our everyday lives is simple if you just take the time to look at it closely enough.
Absolutely. And as always, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own, a question that builds on everything we've unpacked today. We talked about biotechnology and medicine. Well, as synthetic biology continues to advance at a breakneck pace, it is highly likely that within our lifetimes, scientists will learn how to mass produce exact, biologically identical silk fibroin in a lab vat. Real silk, genetically identical down to the molecule, but without the blind worm, without the mulberry tree, without the boiling water, and without the grueling, exploited rural labor.
A totally clean break.
Right. When that day comes and silk is just another liquid extruded from a lab, will it still be considered the ultimate luxury? Or is the secret, unacknowledged value of silk inextricably, permanently tied to the sacrifice, the deep history, and the hidden human suffering it takes to create it? We will let you ponder that. Until next time.